Hello family, welcome to another episode of A Date with Kiki. As you know, A Date with Kiki is a show where we open everyone up to the inner world of men. On our dates, we bring to light some deep struggles in the men's world that are hidden to us, as well as the solution to the struggles. I'm sure it's no longer news that I've got two awesome teenage boys in my quiver, and trust me when I say I would have it no other way. A few weeks ago, my boys and I got into a conversation from nowhere, and one of them just said, "Mom, you don't know and might never know what it means and how much we contend with as teens with African background living in the Western world." Excuse me? Hang on a second. That's true. I grew up in Africa with Africans who have got almost the same ideology and culture as I do, and our children are growing up in a totally different environment, being raised by African parents. Does that mean we've been unrealistic with them? Well, today we're going to be answering these questions. My guest is a youth coach and a mentor, and he's been working with teenagers in the UK for over 3 years. He also runs a public speaking center for teenagers and he owns his own podcast, A Big Loud Mouth. Please join me to welcome Rumen Obasohan to A Date with Kiki. Hi, Rumen.
Hi. Thank you.
You're welcome.
For inviting me.
Glad to have you. Actually, I was going to ask you about that big loud mouth, but I'll leave that for another day.
Anytime. We're ready to talk about that.
Yeah, how you doing? Do you want to tell us a bit about what you do with teenagers?
So I mentor and train teens. I know we're talking about boys, but mine's both boys and females, ranging actually from 8 till 18.
Oh,
so
wow.
I've got a different range, different characters, different mental capability. It's been fun. I've been started just over 3 years. 3 years now I've been doing that, and then obviously I run a podcast where we talk about my experience as a Nigerian living in the UK.
Okay, so we're in the right place.
Yeah, so we're in the right place. We're talking about the right things, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for coming once again.
No problem.
And like you said, but today we're going to be talking about our children, African children living in the Western world, you know, what they contend with, the struggles, just to make us understand these things as parents. And thankfully, you are the right person to talk to. Yes, so let's carry on. First of all, now, I think one question for me is, what do you think the challenge is? How is there a clash between us, the parents, and these children?
Absolutely, that's a huge clash. Well, what is that clash? Clash is the wrong word. But I said there's a very clear distinctions between an African child, male, growing up in the UK than it is an African in Nigeria with the whole same, or in Africa, particularly I'm Nigerian, so I can only talk about that Nigerian culture. Okay. For me, I had the same experience growing up. Grew up in Nigeria, then came over to the UK when I was 10. So I still experienced the latter stages of primary school, and I experienced the whole stages of secondary school to college to university, and it was totally different because it felt like you live two different worlds. One, you live home, which is 100% Africa, 100% Benin, right? There's no distinction between my household in Benin and my household in the UK. Zero distinction. Okay. But when you go outside, then you see a vast different understanding. One, in terms of being African, there's this, it already comes with a stigma. Like in the UK, there's a stigma attached to it. Thankfully, that's been changing. We're seeing that change a little bit more. When I first came to UK, it was a stigma of African smells, that whole poverty. You guys are all poor, you live in a hut. Now it's a little bit more commercially acceptable. It's a little bit more, I guess, more of a mainstream. It's a little bit popular, but it still has that stigma. Anything that goes wrong, in the TV, you hear about, the bombing, being an Nigerian male. You hear about stabbing. The first thing that they talk about, they don't talk about it being a UK British person, but they'll automatically associate and go, is an African, or he's Nigerian, or he's just somewhere from Africa. So anything that is negative, everybody remembers that you're African.
So how does that affect our children?
It affects on many different levels. One, because you're never praised. You struggle with identity because you're never praised on who you are. Right? You're always praised on what people expect you to be.
And again, at home, you have that expectation.
Exactly.
And then the society has...
Perfect. So you're in this two world where one doesn't really totally accept you, and the one that does accept you doesn't really understand you. So it's a whole identity issue that mainly stems from within African male. And male, we struggle with identity crisis. Especially as teenagers, the number one thing that most teenagers suffer for is who they are. Right, trying to figure out who they are and where they fit into this world and where they fit into their lifestyle. Now, coming home as an African and raising up teenagers, number one thing on your head is good education, right? Because you're trying to foresee their future. You're trying to foresee to make sure they have a great future, a better future than you had, right? Exactly. And you're trying to impart some level of you into them with that one, you understanding them, and two, trying to get them to understand you. Definitely, I think that's identity is definitely one of the main crises teenage boys specifically we'll deal with, and we've seen that come into different places. We've seen how gang cultures have increased. We've seen
now my question, the next question would be that, so are you saying that this gang culture and all of these things that are happening in our world today, yes, of course, we see a lot of them are associated with the Black African boys or the Black background boy. So are we saying that this has got something to do with our expectations or how we judge our children?
No, I wouldn't say it has anything to do with our expectations, but I think it has a lot to do with... Okay, in a way, it depends. It's the repercussion of our expectations. Okay. As an African family or African background, right? Is the repercussion of their expectation. One, either the expectation is ridiculous. When I mean ridiculous, I don't mean, all you have to do is study law, be a lawyer, be an engineer, be a doctor. Those are your three options in the African background. Otherwise, anything else you do, we can just agree with being in finance. Finance is like, okay, you're
like
still
an accountant.
You're still within the corporate realm, so okay, we can manage. But anything outside of that, you have failed. All right, so so that being said, it's like, okay, not that those expectations aren't realistic, right, or aren't real, but if you don't understand your child's passion, they're crazy. They're a crazy expectation to have. It's almost nonsensical to have those self-expectations if you don't understand your child's gifting, your child's passion, and what your child's going to do. What's the point? So what happens is that the repercussion is that you form an edge of... There isn't a line of communication, and with that communication, you can't have an understanding. So what happens is they will find that. You're going to find that. One, you're going to find that with a group of friends that understands you, right, to some level of extent, and they appreciate you for just who you are. Right? They appreciate you, or if you're the clown, or if you're somebody that has low expectation, you're just somebody that just want to be wayward, they'll take you for who you are. And eventually what happens is that you start forming little cliques, little communication here and there. And
because they accept you for who you are, you will want to do what they want you to do. Exactly. So you want to please them.
So eventually, I grew up, when we first came to the UK, we lived in Hackney, in Homerton, and at that point I was like, why the worst place to live in the UK? And that it was very easy to get into a gang at that time. Very easy, because they had this sort of brotherly love and this sort of brotherly understanding, right? There's a very good friend of mine. I know that, that's kind of one thing I kind of appreciate my dad at that point, because I know that if we had stayed in Hackney, 100% I would have been a gang member, like without a shadow of doubt, just because of how much they cultivate and groom you and make you feel a certain type of way. It starts off with very little things, right? It starts off with just, you guys, you just ride the bicycle around the area, right? And you start being friends. And eventually they ask you, okay, cool, just do this. It's something as little as, I don't know, back then it was like putting a sting bomb at, your local corner shop. And you just do that. You do that, everybody cheers for you. You feel a level of achievement. You're part of something. You're part of something greater than you. And that's the feeling. That's the feeling. And eventually, you ride from one block to another block, and then they tell you, okay, cool, go to this other block and see what happens, or go to this other block and punch somebody, and just see what happens. And eventually that escalates, and then you're tied in. It can go from being to just giving you money, hey, just this little pocket money, hold this, do that.
So when all those things are happening as parents, how do we find out?
You're never going to find out. If you don't have, this is what I'm saying, because the repercussion of those overzealous expectation aren't being met. So the trust is not there, because the child sees you as a teenager, sees you as somebody that they don't trust enough to want to tell you, because you don't even want to, in a way, come to their playground of understanding. Right? You don't want to come to their field of being able to relate to them, relatability is very important. And if they don't have that, you don't have trust. You don't have somebody that you can confide in. So as a parent, you see African parents, dominant African parents, you're in this hierarchy of my way, my rules, my household. Anything outside of that, you just...
And unknown to us, that those things are chasing our children away from us, particularly our boys who want to have the mind of their own. And having worked with a couple of boys in the past few years, I think I would say it over and over again that they're worth listening to. They're worth listening to because they know what they want. And I think where the frustration also comes in from is because we don't listen to them, they get frustrated. And like you said, they get other people who listen to them and cheer them up. And before you know it, they get into the wrong thing.
Yeah. So that's exactly what happens. I see a lot of different teenagers in my time, and in some with different experience and vastly smart and highly educated. But there's this, again, misunderstanding between the parents. There was a case I was, involved in, and I remember speaking to the child, and just, he had all this pressure. All of it is good. When I'm thinking about it in the long term, it's great. He's talking about, his parents pressuring him. He's got his Cambridge interviews. They forcing him to study something that he doesn't want to study, even though he's excelling at that subject. But to him, it's like, I don't really want to do this because I don't have the desire, but I'm doing it because of my parents. And I remember I had a conversation with the parents. I had a conversation with the parents. I was like, what do you see in your child? And they say everything I would expect parents to say. And I said to, okay, how far do you think your child's going to go doing this? And they gave me the typical answer. Yeah, if it does well, I was like, okay, that's great. What if I told you that the moment your child goes to university, your child's never coming back home? And they was like, what do you mean? I was like, I can guarantee you now, and when he goes to university, the level of freedom that he's going to acquire and independence that he's going to acquire, he's never wanted to come back home. Wow. Ever.
And what was the response?
I had a response. Obviously,
like I'm doing right now.
They were extremely shocked. And I told them, this is the reality. The reality is, and the reason for that is because, yes, all of this expectation, yes, every parent should want your child to aspire for greatness. That's a fact, right? And you want to push your child, and you want especially as Africans, because we feel like we were not as privileged as everybody else in terms of education, in terms of growing up in Nigeria, more specific, and the things that happened, there was lack of opportunity. Now you come to the UK, there's this vast wealth of opportunity, and you have the acumen and the knowledge to be successful. So you want your child to be extremely successful in that. But there's that fine line between success and overzealous, right? And trying to understand that is very important for raising teenagers. And I say to the parents, like, it's never going to come home, because home isn't a safe haven to him.
Anymore.
Right? So why would he risk?
Why would I come to where it's not safe for me?
His own independence. Once you go to university, life, the world that is going to be so different. And that almost happened. And I was telling, because I was saying that was me. I was that person. I went to university to satisfy my parents. There was on a different world, I would never go to university. But I went.
And as an African boy,
Yeah.
that's digging your own grave.
Exactly.
We'll come back to that. But we'll take a short break now. And when we come back, Rumen said something about, a point where you said one thing you appreciate your father about when you lived in Acne. We're going to come back to that because I want to talk about that bit, what dad did in that little space of the change. But yeah, we will be back. Please sit tight and see you again soon. Welcome back, and I'm still with my guest, Rumen. Yeah, Rumen, like I said earlier on, you mentioned something about dad, what dad did in the space of the time where you lived in Acne. What exactly did dad did, and what did that mean to you?
Well, I wouldn't say it was straight directly to do with what the road we're leading at. I think I have two older brothers. And I think the story goes was that my immediate older brother obviously was doing something a little bit, dodgy. Let's just use that word.
It doesn't beat you up when you get home.
Yeah, exactly. Was doing something a little bit dodgy, and I just had a massive accident. I had like a huge fight with a person from a gang, and then there was things that were conspiring at that time. And by the way, I was only 10 years old at this point, so to tell you how young I was. So there was a lot of stuff that was boiling, that was being tipped over. So I think that as well, and going to the police station, for the things that happened, that kind of decided that it was enough. Being in that environment probably wasn't conducive for the boys that he had. So decided to uproot us and move to the suburb at that time.
Yeah.
But eventually, we all know how time plays. Is no longer the suburb. So we left that and moved to Dagenham. Obviously, moving into Dagenham was a huge change, because I think it was the first time I actually felt out of place, and I was very vocal about being out of place. I remember being excluded quite a few times from school. But when I look back on it, as an adult, as a grown man, I always say I appreciate my dad for that move, because I know the friends that I had in Hackney, all of them were part of a gang. A few of them are still in prison up to today. 2 of them been killed. Wow. So I know that road that I potentially would have been heading for. When I look at my primary school year 6 primary school photo, all of the boys there have every single one of them have been incarcerated.
Wow.
Apart from me.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's touching. That's so.
Yeah. So when I look at the grand scheme of it, so that's why I say but I know that communication between myself and my dad never took place, in terms of that's the reason why we're moving. But I know that the road that we were going. But then
I guess because of your own time, because your dad is almost the same age as my dad would be if we're still alive. But so I think kind of understand it. I don't think for us now, I'm assuming it's no longer the case. We have the communication, we listen to our children. I'm assuming so. But yeah, to my next question, Rumen. So would you say the environment our children grow up in matter a lot in the growing up years and what they turn out or become eventually?
Absolutely, yes. I think environment definitely, like everybody says, you're a product of your environment, right? So that's like the general consensus. But I say in an African home, you have 2 environments that you grow up in. You grow up in Africa, in the UK, or in Nigeria. You have that culture is so strong that it's its own environment, and then grow up in whatever bubble the world is that you live in. So in our case, it was East London. So that definitely played a huge 2 different things. One, when I was growing up in secondary school, before I went to secondary school, there was like this stern conversation that, my dad had with me, which was, don't forget who you are. And
which we're all here.
exactly. Which is, don't forget who you are.
The child of whom you are.
Yeah. And if you get stuff from this school, you're going back to Nigeria. So that was the environment that I had. And then going into secondary school, things changed. I saw a lot of things change. One, it was being able to figure out who I was and who I am, the environment that I was in a way we had to have our own sort of African environment within our school, because when I was at home, I was 100% African. And then going out into the school environment, even though being African wasn't popular, I had to find a way to create that same culture, that same feeling, because I felt that was who I am. I felt that was who I am, and because I didn't want to trade, I didn't want to play either or, because I felt like when I was in Hackney, I was playing either or. Right, so at home I'll be African, and then there I'll be whoever they wanted me to be. And when I started to grow up, starting
that
to
identity begin to find itself.
To kick in, I did decide, even with my friends, my group of friends, it became that, my group of friends are all Nigerian. My group of friends are some form of African background. Because that was just my identity. That was the only thing I could find to be relatable, because of how strong the Benin culture or the African culture at home was. So if I was spending a lot of time at home and was spending a lot of time outside of home, it would have been a huge struggle for me to fulfill both sides.
Now I'm wondering how my children are coping, because I'd say that we're probably, we've got that African, we're African, and we live in a community where in the schools there's just about 3 or 4 blacks.
So it's a tricky one. I felt like this, what your boys are going through, I went through that, but I went through that at university. So when I went to university,
so of course then you had already identified.
I already have who I am.
Confident in who you are.
However, when I went to uni, I was the only black person in my course. I was the first black male to graduate from my course for 10 years. So it was totally different, and I guess it made me more vulnerable. And I feel like that's what your boys are going through now, is that vulnerability to who they are. So when you're in a situation when you're the only person in that environment, right, because you don't have anybody to relate to, because you don't have something of that sort of straight away common interests, right, 100% vested interest, like without any form of conversation or dialogue taking place, you feel yourself extremely vulnerable. It's like that issue is, there was this saying that, when everybody goes on a fly on a plane, right, and you're in a situation where everybody is all white and you're only a black person, right, in that plane, and you find somebody that sits next to you and that person is black, right, automatically you're going to connect to that person.
My oldest son, who is currently going for his youth parliament meeting now, when he joined, when they started this term, there were 2 of them who were blacks, black background, and the younger boy, the other boy is a younger one. And immediately, the boy would always want to sit next to. So my son came on the way for a trip. My son came, said, "Mom, I became a compulsory big brother. I thought I left that at home." But when we went for the trip, I became a big brother. Oh God, I had another fucker with me.
and that's just how. And I feel as parents is actually I feel as parents is a parent's responsibility to understand the environment that their child is growing up in.
Yes.
Especially more so African, because of the dictatorship that we have at home. Right? If you're a dictator, it is your responsibility to know about your realm. Right? It is your responsibility to know about the kingdom in which your subjects are living in.
We'll put an end to this here, but I definitely have to bring you back for another episode.
No, I would love to be back.
Please, please, please. I'll bring you back. I think we should be back next week with you, because that's something you said. You are a king over your kingdom, and you need to know the kingdom, your kingdom, and your subjects in the kingdom. Huh, that's deep, Rumen. Guys, I think you agree with me that we have to bring Rumen back. But for now, we'll draw the curtain. Thank you so much for staying tuned with AJ's Kiki, and I'll see you again, same place, same time next week. Love you.